And I went geeked out and looked it up, and it's 0.064% of the speed of light. Now, in Star Trek,
Wow.
they go around the sun and go back in time. But
Yeah.
nobody's ever made anything that's gone this fast anywhere. Well, astrobiology has a variety of definitions. I'm with a big tent astrobiologist. I see life on our planet and other worlds as all one continuum. But it's the search for evidence of life elsewhere in the universe, how it evolves, how it expands throughout the universe.
Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Keith, welcome to the Ignition Sequence podcast. It's great to have you on as a guest.
My pleasure.
And first of all, I just want to dive right into this. As we were recording this, it's the holiday season between Christmas and New Year's, and just Christmas Eve, the NASA Parker Solar Probe made that big close pass by the sun. I'm really excited about that. Tell us about this probe. How long has it been out in space? And boy, man, the speed too. I want to talk about the speed and the whip effect, the whiplash effect that Venus did for it.
Yeah, well, this is the prop I've been using on TV lately, my little artificial sun. The idea behind this is it's really celestial billiards, where you send something from Earth, you go around Venus, and then you go back around Earth, and you do it a bunch of times. Every flyby you do, you steal a little of the momentum from the planet you're going over, but you're gaining it yourself as a spacecraft. Normally, you don't want to go too fast because you got to go to another planet and slow down. So that's sort of one of the usual limits. But here, the whole idea is it's a short mission with very short times close to the sun. And of course, the sun is hot. And this is going to get, again, not just under 4 million miles from the surface. So the whole idea was to get it going as fast as possible so you could cover as much ground as possible for the shortest amount of time and maybe do it more than once. So it was one of these celestial, juggling points. And they came up with what they did. And it worked times before this. And the big enchilada was the other night. Of course, it's going to do this 5 or 6 more times. So if they do it more times, it's gravy. But they got everything they needed to meet the mission goals.
And I guess the speed was something like 430,000 miles per hour. I mean, that's an insane. That's an insane
I know. You're doing
speed.
You're doing the same gestures I was doing on TV. And I went geeked out and looked it up, and it's 0.064% of the speed of light. Now, in Star Trek, they go around the sun and go back in time. But nobody's ever made anything that's gone this fast anywhere. And it's quite an accomplishment in and of itself, when the spacecraft worked.
Is it possible, you say it could go around 4 or 5 more times, could the speed even get faster as it makes multiple trips around the sun?
I don't think it gets too much faster. The idea is that it's in the orbit that every time you sped it up, they wanted to drop it into an orbit that got better and better in terms of the view of the sun. And I believe the orbit they're in now is pretty much the static one it's going to be in until next year. This isn't going to be forever. It's pretty much into 2025. And at some point, either at the end of the design mission, like if it keeps going, they'll I'll keep listening for data. But at some point, they'll decide that, that's the show's over. They're going to take the spacecraft and actually, deliberately point it so that the instruments get even more crazy views of the sun. And then at some point, the spacecraft will get one last look at the sun with no protection. All the instruments will melt off. And all that will be left is the heat shield, and that'll just orbit the sun for a couple million years. So...
Hey, man, I love the fact that NASA can build stuff that lasts. That's crazy.
Well, here you go. You and I I got as much gray hair as you do, okay? Yeah. You've got the fastest thing anybody has ever made going closer to not only our sun, but any star than any other country or space agency has. Pause. At the same time, you've got 2 Voyager spacecraft in interstellar space. One of them is almost a light day away. And we've been reprogramming. There's some geeks sitting in a dark room at JPL reprogramming these things. Now you say, well, it's old spacecraft. Well, yeah, I've got a calculator from that period of time, and it still works. But the notion that you could sit there, have technology that has a legacy that extends several generations in this case, can be in interstellar space. You can talk to it and monkey with it in ways that it wasn't designed to do. That tells me something about, the resilience of engineering and so forth. Now, New Horizons is going to do the same thing in about 6 or 7. I'm not exactly sure when, but it's going to hit heliopause and then be interstellar space, doing the same thing, but with instruments that were 35 to 40 years newer. So, get ready for more interesting stuff.
Well, and to your point, weren't you part of this team that kind of rebooted let me look this up here because I don't know everything. The ISEE-3, which is the International Sun-Earth Explorer. Didn't NASA just kind of let it go? It's done its mission. Forget about it.
Yeah,
And then you and a team of citizen scientists rebooted the darn thing.
Well, me and Dennis Wingo had just done something similar with all the lunar orbiter images that nobody thought could ever be retrieved, and we managed to get a guy to hack the old tape drives that were found in somebody's barn that had been saved by a very forthsightful woman who worked at JPL. We got them working again, but there was a board missing, so we had some guy reverse engineer it so that we could tell it to do what it did back in the day. And then we read the tapes. And these things had more data on them than could have been even used back in the day. So what you saw was dumbed down several times, but it met the mission requirements. It could look down at the surface of the moon. Well, all right. So flash forward. Dennis and I did that. We raised some money. It was all kinds of fun. And just as we're sort of winding that down, a friend of ours who's now left us, but Bob Farquhar, who was the PI on that mission, had been trying forever to get people to pay more attention to it. And it was still out there. They left the transmitter on. So I think Dennis and I looked at each other and said, yeah, let's try that. And so we went, and it was a long story, twisted a lot of arms, but we were able to get the old documentation, figure out what the commands were. And then Arecibo joined in, let us put a box on their dish so you could yell at it. And then when we found that we could get it to say, yeah, I'm here, we still didn't have to be able to talk to it. And we kept trying to send digital commands, but it wouldn't work. So somebody went and actually remembered, hey, 1970s, AOL, dial-up. And we went and had the codes from the tonal things.
The audio code.
Yeah. The spacecraft said, yeah, what do you want? So
wow.
But the thing is, for the short time we got it to fire the engines, ended up that there was some lead propellant in the lines, and we got some data back. Now, if spacecraft is still orbiting the sun, you could probably do that again, but we was sort of a point to be made. We raised like $150,000 from people from everywhere. And it got everybody thinking, why can't you? And now you see people talking about diving into the records for other missions. Some of our stuff is actually the lunar orbiter stuff is all sitting at the archives, National Archives now. So, and it's also included in the PDS, the Planetary Data System for JPL, as if it was a mission that had just finished, even though it had flown back in the 60s. So old stuff still works. I'll be 70 soon. I'm still hitting the keyboards and playing with screwdrivers. So, old stuff still works.
And I love this. Science fiction always lays the groundwork and projects what is possible in our science future. And how many shows, movies, scientific, sci-fi films have we seen where they come across some ancient form of technology or old form of technology buried in the sand or buried in some cave on some planet, and they try and doctor it, and voila, it comes alive and they can actually use it. And now you've shown that can actually happen in real life scientific astrobiology work.
Yeah, I mean, if this guy built it, I don't know that we have, how many fingers does he have? He has 4. Okay, so it's the Simpsons octal planet, with a.
Yeah.
The point is, there's a commonality, though it's important, back in time of us. Some of the people were still alive, or we could find the records that NASA had kept. And in one case, it was sort of like Rosetta Stone with the lunar orbiter thing, where we had 2,000 something like tapes that all looked identical, and then there were a couple of weird ones. And we remembered that there was a couple of famous images that had been played back again and again, and somebody made a copy of the tape, and it was made, believe, a little later, and it had been demodulated, and we could get at it, and it looked different. So it's sort of like, why did these 2 tapes stand out from all the others? Well, it's like Rosetta Stone. Somebody said, I see the cartouche with Ptolemy in there. If I could see that hieroglyphic and Greek, and they sort of figured out how, and then once you know one thing and you know two, then you know five, then you know 10. And so we
Right.
used what we discovered on how to line these images up from that one tape that was kind of there. And then one day we were watching it, and I swear I was on a cheaper version of what we're doing now. And Dennis was there on the machine in California. I was back here in Virginia. And if you remember the movie Contact, where they play the thing back and it's the tape upside down and the swastika, it was one of those moments. We had techno-archaeology. We had dug back in time and found something. And once we did it once, then we did it twice, then then it was just a matter of racking the tapes and spinning them up. With ISC3, something very similar. Once we had figured out how to do one command, how to literally yell at the spacecraft, because it doesn't have a computer. So when we called it the reboot, no, you reboot a computer. IC3 is like a toaster. You turn it on, you turn it off. And it was on, and we just told it to pay attention because it was hardwired to pay attention to certain commands. It didn't think, it just did.
And what is ISC3 doing now? What is it? It's just floating around in space?
It's going around the sun. There's a Twitter account I keep going, and it's now snarky, and it makes fun of the Voyager twins and whatnot. I do believe that there may be another generation of people who want to go and play with it. We had wanted to put it in another halo orbit around Earth and start sending weather reports again. And then we thought we might try and get it into the orbit that the Artemis, all this stopped when the spacecraft decided to stop behaving the way we wanted it to. So at that point, we were like, well, it might hit the moon. We don't know. It didn't.
The other thing I want to ask you about, and I don't know if you know this aspect of some of the NASA scientific things that they're doing, but they have this giant antenna on the South Pole. And they listen to sound particles and
ice.
collect data coming down from space. Yeah, right. And it's at the South Pole because there's no radio RF, there's no radio interference or anything like that. Very crystal clear, ability to hear things from the universe. And there's a story that just broke, I think within the last week or two, 10 days or so, where they're now thinking, because they have detected particles not only falling to Earth, but then going back from Earth back up into space. And they're theorizing now that may be an introductory concept of a parallel universe where everything is reverse. Does that make sense to you? Did you hear anything about that?
Yeah, I'm a biologist, so I approach this from the whole thing of why you have right-handed versus left-handed molecules in biology. And there's like, okay, well, there could be another universe. And you hear something called mirror macrobiology. So there's other ways to do the same thing. And as far as the physics go, I stepped one foot into it. I understand. I just watched Interstellar again last night, so I'm sort of, and I get that. You look at the universe in terms of where it came from, and did it simultaneously come into existence as one thing, or did it come in as an example of a matter and antimatter universe? Apparently did. But then why are we only seeing matter? Where's the antimatter? But more, where's this dark matter? And then if you start spending too much time not losing your mind thinking about quantum mechanics and the whole thing of causality and things that are linked together, coupled and across vast distances, and the whole thing of what Einstein called spooky action at a distance. Yeah, sure, why not? Multiverses. I mean, they made a lot of movies around them. I would just sit there and just read these articles and just let people who are vastly smarter than me think about it. But then if you sit and think about it, the way that natural things are, there's always a symmetry somewhere until you go down to the quantum level. Then it's just chaos. And maybe chaos is what's really running the show, not symmetry. I don't know. I'm just a biologist.
It's the beauty of science in general, the fact that we are constantly learning new things because we're always poking around, sneaking around, using mathematics, using our brains to try and understand not only our world, but our universe. Now we got the telescopes out there in deep space, and it's just so darn exciting.
Yeah. Isn't it? Yeah. Well, it's kind of weird because, like I said, I'll be 70 next year. I was sitting in an ecology class in 1975 or 6, and I could tell you, I just have to look it up. And we are just being taught that all life on Earth is dependent upon energy from the sun, full stop. Whether it comes to you directly as a plant, or that you eat the plant, or you eat something that ate the plant, or you die and your body falls to the bottom of the ocean, your body was made out of stuff that came somehow from the sun. And so, in other words, and then suddenly they sent a submarine called Alvin, a deep submersible, down to a hydrothermal vent, which we sort of thought might exist, where materials are coming up from the inside the Earth. And they found whole communities of tube worms, of bacteria, as shrimp and whatnot, living very close to these extremely hot vents. But the chemistry that was happening there, you just had totally different electron acceptors, and the biochemistry was different, but it was biochemistry. It was just done with different flavors, so to speak. That totally tossed, and I'm literally sitting there reading Science magazine saying that my book was wrong. And that's sort of where a lot of astrobiology came from, is we used to say life as we know it. Well, we found life as we didn't know it, where we never expected to find it. And then you sit back, and now you're thinking, well, is it like that in other places in the solar system? Well, yeah, so apparently Enceladus may have some sort of vents at the bottom, possibly Europa and other places. That's why we want to go there now, because our own planet has surprised us with something that we didn't think was possible. And this is just from this is after years and years of people saying, oh, no, there's nothing down there. And then suddenly, the oligarchy is toppled by facts, and suddenly your horizons open up and you say, oh, wait a minute, look at all those frozen moons with oceans. Yeah, that's how science sometimes works. It's a serendipitous, oops, look what I found.
Wow. You're a journalist. You worked at NASA. How many years did you work at NASA?
It depends what you qualify as a NASA civil servant for 4 years. I worked there for a decade in either as a scientist at one nonprofit or another. So it's a solid decade. And they say you can take your person out of NASA, but you can't take the NASA out of the person. Although I've been watching NASA ever since, I keep getting roped into these weird projects, usually like donating my time and my money. So I've kept sort of a backdoor to what all that's going on.
You're the editor and journalist for NASA Watch, which when I was doing my research, someone called it, let me find my note here.
Space Drudge?
They call it a notorious website, NASA Watch. But people inside NASA read the blog daily. Congress reads the blog. The people who fund NASA read it. You got people all around the world reading it, supporting it. You're prolific in your writing on it. Tell us about NASA Watch, and then also your other upstart, astrobiology.com.
Well, NASA Watch is sort of like, the teenager that lives in your basement and won't go get a job. I mean, it started in 1996 on April Fool's Day. It was a coincidence on a little Mac Classic 2 on an ISDN line in my condo. My wife and I were setting it up. And it just started on a whim because my friends were being laid off at NASA. I'd left since then. And I just got mad and created something called RIF Watch, which RIF is for reduction in force. It's the term used when you want to get rid of a lot of people from the government. And I just started posting stuff. And since I didn't work there, I couldn't get in trouble. But people said, how's he doing this? He's broken into our systems. He's managed our mainframe. Who has a mainframe? He's got into our mainframe. And they didn't understand the internet. And for a long time, and I'm not kidding you, I was the oldest blogger, we didn't even have that word back then, that I knew. And flash forward, it just kept happening and happening. It didn't go away. I found other opportunities that came from it. I started some other websites. So this one just kept going. And it just took on a life of its own. And I used to complain that I couldn't be accredited as a journalist because they said, well, you don't print. And okay. So radio doesn't print either, TV, they just broadcast. And so eventually, I'm a Democrat, but the Republicans on the Hill got mad. And they wanted me to be, accredited. The IG, the Inspector General at NASA, they all joined in. And finally, NASA said, Uncle. And I was the first electronic journalist credentialed as by a government agency anywhere. And I used to say, someday there'll be 10 websites like mine. Well, I missed up on a whole bunch of zeros. And now there's a bunch of kids, I can say that, who are picked up whatever idea I had and are now all doing a vastly better job at it than I could ever do. And of course, I keep getting on. So I've dialed back NASA Watch a bit, but I can't. Every time I try and shut it off, oh no, what are we going to do without it? So I keep it going, but I'm a little focused. And I'm focusing more on my other love, which is astrobiology, the astrobiology.com. but I
Mhm.
keep the two going. And for some reason, I'm in everybody's Rolodex to do TV talking head stuff. So I'm literally, I mean, I did Deutsche Welle yesterday and the day before and CNN and da, da, da. So sitting here with a camera is like not alien to me. I do it once a week or so somewhere, and there's millions of people who seem to not be tired of my ugly face. So it's a direct result of NASA Watch, of
Well, let me
becoming.
ask you about so your motive initially started off maybe with a little chip on your shoulder, some resentment, wanted to
Oh,
poke
a
the
big
bear.
chip, lots of chips. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I said,
All right.
"Hey, can you come and get me?" And when they tried to come and get me, I go, "Yeah, come on, come on, come on. I'm the mouse,
But
the
now,
elephant.
but
The
now it,
elephant's."
but now it's turned into something that is really, respectful. And even though there are duplicates all around by younger people doing it, um, it's still very well regarded. And so, what is the purpose now when you still blog on
Well,
NASA? Why is
uh,
it just to be informative, or are you still kind of like judging it as a critical eye, like journalists do, or
well,
what's your
it's
motive and expectation of it?
it's like the internet. It won't go away. I mean, I had, some business ventures. I sold that company, and then that went a different direction. So suddenly, I was going to retire, kind of, anyways. And so I'm just focused now on what is interesting to me. Full stop. I don't cover a lot of the stuff I used to. I do commercial space if it has a relevance to the agency, but it's only, I don't run around to events and cover them. I just can't do that anymore. I'm too old, and it is too, because of the pandemic, everything's online all at once. It's like that movie. And so it's
Yeah.
like I could sit and watch 19 things every day and get nothing done. And there are 100 other people doing it. So I try and sort of, I don't know, get a level above it and just say, well, what am I seeing? What's important? And, you know, I like to say to people, I have a perfectly bad reputation to protect, but I don't know. I get people calling me. I don't kiss and tell, but people would be startled at who I talk to and who talks to me. And it's all, I'm not going to tell anybody, but it's the way that things work here in Washington, and it
Yeah.
has always been in the space community. We're one big family. Here in Washington, you could say I'm outside the Beltway, but you could say I'm a swamp creature. I'm deep state.
Hmm.
I'm I don't know what I don't know. It's what gets me through the day. And I always felt that if I piss people off but they want to take me out for drinks, there's a karmic balance that I've somehow maintained so far.
Are you like the deep throat and All the President's Men? You're the guy who's got
I know.
or do you meet
Uh,
or do you meet Deep Throat in a dark parking garage and get
uh,
NASA secrets and spill
yeah,
the beans?
I've broken some. Yeah, yeah. I guess you could
Okay.
say that. Yeah, kind of. But I'm
So
not going to
I'm
tell you.
very
I'm
curious.
not going to tell you who Deep Throat is at NASA. Give up. Don't try.
But you're saying there is a deep throat at NASA who
There's
feeds you
many
information.
deep throats.
Really? Really? Are
NASA
they
people.
mostly men, or is it men and women?
It's people all over. I'm not kidding you.
Just
It's
people.
people of extreme stature, not just at NASA, but the other marble buildings around DC.
Right.
And it's also people who are at the grunt level who know what's actually going on. And a lot of, I assume that 51% of the people who read it hate my guts and 49 like me. It's never been, I'm ostracized regularly still. That Bill Nelson's public affairs office won't let me anywhere near him. And I don't really care because
Right.
he's sort of useless. I got along well with Jim Bridenstine before, and the new guy looks interesting. And it's weird because I'm a Democrat, but I get along much better with the Republican NASA people than the Democrats. And I don't understand why. Maybe that's good. I don't know.
And I do want to ask you about the change in administration now. Trump is back in office. They got the whole transition thing going on right now. What do you see as the future of NASA under this new administration?
Well, it's kind of interesting. People, they always bring Elon into this, and I've known him forever. I haven't talked to him in a while, but I knew him when he was in his 20s, and I like him. I like his rocket science much more than I do his political science right now. I'll leave it at that. But the guy that they picked to run the agency, Isaacman, people say, "Oh, these billionaires." Well, okay, well, Bezos is about to launch his New Glenn rocket, which is vastly more capable than the SLS that we're going to supposedly go to the moon with. Starship has already launched a bunch of times. Musk builds them like corn silos, And if he loses one, he's like, "Oh yeah, hey, did you see how that blew up?" It's just like
Yeah.
they're totally in a different mind of how to do it. Fly and test, fly and test. Whereas with NASA, it's fly and hope, and then wait 3 years and launch again, and it's billions and billions over budget. So you've got this dichotomy where private sector using a lot of basic NASA technologies, taking the technology to places NASA can only dream of, and are now trying to buy access to it, and that seems to be working. And you got a guy who's going to run NASA, who is a rich person, who bought several missions, has been into space twice. He's made money. He knows what these things cost. He's probably had, back and forth sessions with SpaceX and how much to charge for something. And every mission he's done is more competitive and more interesting and so forth. But he's been there, done that, literally. And so this is, a guy who's now going to run the place. He's a tabula rasa, if you will, a blank slate. He's never worked in government before. And I can tell you that can cause a lot of brain damage rather quick. And he doesn't know any better, like a lot of these rich guys, to read a lot of science fiction and to have more resources in the case of Elon than many countries, or Bezos, and no notion of why they shouldn't try and make all that science fiction stuff happen. And they're doing a pretty darn good job of it. And now you got one of these guys who's going to run NASA. So I don't know. I mean, if you're gonna change direction and strike off on a new foot, this is a good way to do it. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. I gotta say, it's pretty jaw-dropping when you see one of Musk's rockets come back to Earth, and then the claw just reaches out and grabs it and pulls it back into the whatever that thing is, the tower. It's just jaw-dropping. And the first time he re-landed a booster rocket back on a platform, you're like going, "Holy crap! Why is that taking 35 years to do that?"
Well, I said the first couple of times he did this, I sent Elon little emails. It was holy, and his response was, "Yeah." I mean, it's just in your face stuff, but it wasn't always that easy for him. I mean, like I said, I knew him way back and when my late co-author, Frank Sitzen, was the first person he hired as an office staff in DC. And Frank and I came up with this idea as a brain fart one night saying, "Why don't you bring your Falcon 1 to Washington and have a reception outside of the Air and Space Museum?" And he said, "Hey, that's an interesting idea." So he did. And people were mocking him and said, "That boy in his rocket, and that'll never work. And who does he think he is?" Well, okay, flash forward.
Right.
Sometimes being told you can't do something is the best impetus to go out and make it actually happen.
Agreed. Astrobiology.com. Why and what motivates you to get in behind that?
Well, that's the other side of, when I grew up in the 60s and I read Carl Sagan's Intelligent Life in the Universe, and I was always just fascinated with biology and life in the universe. So that's been since way back. Since the mid 60s. And so when I finally went to school, I ended up as a biology major. I took some time off, but went back, got my undergrad degrees and my grad degree. And my research was on originally something that was supposed to have been on Challenger, and it didn't happen. And so I went and did something else, and then blah, blah, blah. I applied for some jobs, and I ended up in Washington working for USRA at their old Space Life Science division, running a committee on the future of space life science. And after that, I was just in on all of the program reviews, and I ran peer reviews for this. I had Carl Sagan's proposals come in for review and all that, So I saw everything like drinking from a fire hose. And I also knew, though, the astrobiology people, it was called exobiology at the time, the SETI people looking for intelligent life. And I just knew those folks. And then in 1996, when the Allen Hills Mars meteorite was found, that just like put an electrical cord into, oh my God, we've stopped thinking about this. We need to look at it again. And I got dragged out to NASA Ames on all the original meetings. And it's at one of them that I bought the domains astrobiology.com, .org, and .net, because that's all you could at the time. I bought .com so I could do a website. I bought .org so that the astrology UFO people couldn't get it. And I got .net just in case. And I've had them ever since. And then
Did you have to pay a domain squatter thousands of dollars for them?
No. As a matter of fact, they were free when it used to be free.
Hallelujah. That's fantastic. I love hearing that.
I think I may be paid, I don't know, in the past 30 years. I don't know. It's like, I don't care. I sold some domains for big bucks that I wasn't using. So,
so you're the domain squatter. Oh, that's you.
Well, I had one for my hometown, and I sold it for $50,000. And I turned around and said to my, today, trust me. And I told my
Dang.
wife, we're going to have to wait on the roof upstairs because I got this project with like Lunar Orbiter project, and I use that to forward fund it. So,
Wow.
and when we
Look at
finally
you.
talked to IC3, I remember I sent
You've been in
Elon.
Washington too long. You know how to play the game a little
Well,
bit.
yeah, and I'm not making any. Trust me, I ain't making any money off these crazy ideas. And then it was funny because when we finally commanded IC3 to do something, I sent Elon Musk a note saying, "I'm a space pirate," and he thought, "See, that's the best news I've gotten all day. You and me both." But you know,
love it.
I don't like being told that I can't do something. I mean, my former business partner and I built a greenhouse up on Devon Island, up near the North Pole. We grew, plants up there as if it was a remote spacecraft on Mars. And I went to Eber's base camp for a month with a friend of mine who became the first astronaut to summit. And I did live stuff there. And I said to NASA,
And
I'm
you
going to
brought
come back.
moon rocks with you too. You brought moon
Yeah,
rocks
we
with
had
you to Everest, didn't you?
4 little Apollo 11 moon rocks. And that was
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, getting those was a story. They finally arrived the day before I was going to leave in a FedEx box on a Saturday morning. After months of saying, "Oh, we don't trust these guys," so I couldn't figure out how to get them into Nepal because I got 3 different answers. So I finally just stuck them in my pocket and took them.
I love it. I love it.
I'm a moon rock smuggler.
So astrobiology, for people who are just tuning into this podcast who maybe are science minded but not, scientifically, actually in the business, what is astrobiology, and where is it going to take us in the future in relationship to space and humans living on the moon or on Mars?
Well, astrobiology has a variety of definitions. I'm a big tent astrobiologist. I see life on our planet and other worlds as all one continuum, how we get there. So some people say astrobiology is the search for life elsewhere, and that's it, or looking for chemicals that can form life. They're very focused on things. That's fine. You need people doing that. But it's the search for evidence of life elsewhere in the universe, how it evolves, how it expands throughout the universe. So it's a life universe and everything, 42, depending on what books you read and everything. And it's evolved out of earlier things which were focused on, is there life on Mars? Is there life in meteorites? And after these big meetings in 1996 and 97, where Vice President Gore and a bunch of people got involved after the Mars meteorite came in, it became a big deal. And I was sitting in all the meetings with all the cool people just having these discussions. And Dan Golden, to his credit, the administrator of NASA, said that he wants this to be a big thing. And it became one. And now, instead of just being a bunch of, geologists meeting chemists or astronomers for the first time, which is what happened, now to be an astrobiologist really means you have 5 different backgrounds. And it's not just in English, it's all around the world. And you've got astrobiology, astrobiology. I mean, it's all over the world. And I get emails regularly from people in India, wanting to know where they can go to school for this, or, hey, we've just opened a department of astrobiology in Bangalore or whatever. So it took on, it's been a full solid generation since we first came up with the word and the notion. And now it's a thing. It's a thing that people do everywhere. And it's becoming more of an embracing thing it's like Carl Sagan is one of the patron saints, but it really is in the perspective of I tell your listeners, Earth is a planet too. Well, people don't realize that. We're a planet. We're subject to all the things that all the other planets are. And if you want to do an understanding of how life happened elsewhere, you don't necessarily have to say that what happened here is the only way, but it did happen here. So So as we go to these other worlds, like you see these rovers on Mars, they're really looking for evidence of life or something. That's now become a profound aspect of a lot of things we do. And for example, you may ask about Parker Solar Probe again. Okay, it's got an astrobiology component. It was once thought that, only planets like Earth orbiting a G-star are where you're going to find life. Well, now we're thinking that there's many more planets orbiting small red dwarfs, M dwarfs, and many of them now are being shown to be Earth-size. Now the question is, are they habitable, and A and B inhabited? 2 different, questions. But these little stars have a lot of solar flares, much more than a star, much larger. So the point is, all right, you got all these 3 planets in the habitable zone around this little red star, but the thing flares all the time. How does that affect the planets? Are they getting fried all the time? So understanding how a star works, not only is it how we keep from freezing or melting, but also from getting zapped to death with radiation. So anything we've learned from heliophysics or from Parker Solar Probe or for Solar Probe or any of these other things looking at our sun is directly applicable to the equations we put together to figure out whether a planet around a certain type of star, what chances it might have of being around long enough in not bad conditions for life to arise and continue. So again, as a Big Ten astrobiologist, I'm always looking at what's going on saying, yeah, there's an astrobiology component to that. Whereas the people in their cubicles in heliophysics are like, hey, that's not a word I use. Well, I like to bang on those cubicles and say, hey, you know what?
Right.
There's something else to your work that you never thought of.
We know that solar flares have, effects on the Earth's magnetic field. It affects our communications and satellites and all that kind of stuff. Is it possible for a solar flare to actually physically reach the Earth?
Well, they do, and of course, the question is when they come off the sun. If you look at it, you can just go find the videos in 3 seconds with Google. They do blast out into something much larger, but they're sending, charged particles and so forth, and electromagnetic radiation all out of the sun. If the Earth happens to be in the path of where one of those is going, the particles that comprise that flare will hit us, will hit our magnetosphere and be sort of blocked off, which is why our planet, again, there's geology involved in, having a magnetic field or not. But those particles will hit that. But if it's really powerful, it can bash its way through that and into the closer to the Earth. And that's where the satellites that we depend on are located, and they don't just give us cell phones, but they give us weather satellites and communications and all the other sort of stuff. They can be affected, and if powerful enough, it can start hitting electrical grids in the ground and cause them to short out. And if it's even more powerful, then you're talking about acute radiation exposure,
Poisoning,
which, depending, so it could happen, but we're here. And if it has happened, it's happened in a manner that our Earth is resilient enough to bounce back. I'm not sure I'd want to be one of the test animals to try it out, but we're here after billions of years. So somehow we've got the right, Goldilocks sort of thing. Not too hot, not too cold, not too swell,
Yep. Man's attempt to get back to the moon. We've been there, landed there in 1969, several missions after that, walking on the moon, taking core samples of the moon, bringing rocks back, studying it. But now the mission is to go and inhabit the moon, stay there for long periods of time, build habitat structures, and then hopefully do that on Mars. Where are we in that process? How feasible is it? I know there's the Artemis mission that started, phase 1 happened in November 2022, correct? And how did that go? Was that successful?
Well,
Was that successful?
Yes. So far, the rockets that they've launched the Orion spacecraft twice, an early version, and it came back, did fine. And then they launched it again. This time it went around the moon and came back and had problems with its heat shield. So that has been sort of the pacing factor now as to whether they can fix that heat shield so it's safe for the astronauts to fly in. That's what the cause of the current delay is. So the problem, though, is that NASA runs over on costs and delays and schedules and so forth. And one of the reasons, believe it or not, that they can't launch any sooner or couldn't is that after they flew that spacecraft from on the moon, they were going to take its guts out and put it into the next spacecraft. Now, anybody with half a brain would say, well, why don't you just build, it's hard, all the cost goes into building it once. Making multiple copies is easy. But they thought they'd save some nickels and dimes by, just reusing it. Well, it ends up being the taking out and putting back in costs far more than if they just made 10 copies of it or whatever. And on top of that, the launch pads, they've gone over on by billions of dollars on that thing. Meanwhile,
Why?
Musk
Okay, wait. Stop. Why does that happen?
Congress. It's because this
Oh
thing
my
was
God.
designed. I just wrote about this on NASA Watch. I just said, we're going to be launching, hopefully, New Glenn soon. You've got 2 monstrous rockets, consumer products designed by with some government help, but help isn't like paying for everything. Musk is off with a company now, and he's launching 2 or 3 rockets a day making money, and he's pouring that into the other thing. But when it comes to the government rockets, SLS, the Space Launch System, was mandated by Congress, and it's using rocket engines that were designed in the 70s to be reusable. And of course, only NASA would spend $1 billion or $2 billion to build a rocket engine that was reusable, and then spend another $1 billion to make it disposable. Who would do that? Well, Congress told them to do it. And on top of that, they're using the solid rocket boosters that cause problems with the shuttle. And they said, we're going to use those. And you're going to use an external tank. Well, it's because where are they built? Let's see, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Florida. It was a make work project mandated by Congress using antique stuff. It works, but, it's like trying to take a Volkswagen bus and make it from the 60s and turn it into a Tesla. You can do it, but wouldn't,
Right.
why would you unless you have money to burn? Well, NASA's had money to burn until now, and now it's just, you've got Musk out in the desert in Texas launching these things like a crazy man, and they work, and they're cheap, and he can afford to throw them away, whereas NASA wouldn't even think of launching a rocket unless it was perfectly perfect. And Musk is going to say, yeah, close enough. We'll learn a lot on this. If something fails, we'll learn stuff. And I got 15 more of them lined up in the hangar.
Yeah. It's crazy. I live in Pasadena, California. Literally, I have 4 JPL rocket scientists, engineers, people in my neighborhood. I've been up to JPL a couple of times. It's kind of cool, but it's also kind of depressing to see these old buildings and these, I don't know, there's just something, when you go to SpaceX in Long Beach here in LA, it just looks clean and impressive, and it's futuristic and it's modern. And then you go to JPL, and it's just like, I feel like I'm stepping literally back into time, back into the 70s. And I just don't, it's amazing that it still functions, quite honestly.
Well, here's the thing: is the government contracting. All these labs that we have started out as something else after World War II, usually, and you just sort of add things on over time. And when the buildings collapse, you have to replace them. And rarely do you get a government building that's designed to look futuristic. Ames has one they built because it was a demo on a gold, silver, LED standard, whatever. But for most part, these are old buildings and they're falling apart, and NASA hasn't had the money to fix them. And oftentimes they can only build a new building if they tear down more space than they're replacing with. So that's the way the government does stuff. And yet with Elon, look, I know him. A lot of people can say, there are a lot of people who can say they know Elon because they do. He's that kind of guy. And he would say, well, why wouldn't you want to say spacesuit that looks sexy and a rocket? Why not? Why should the future be ugly?
Right.
Why not have these things, if they can look, and of course, by the way, it's sort of like if you look at some of these cars from the 1930s that had all the aerodynamics, well, it also was aerodynamical. There was some beautiful aspect of design, but, with NASA stuff, it looks the way it looks because it's the way it looks. But if you look at Blue Origin, if you look at, they've got a bit of a marketing savvy to it. These are consumer products. They're designed to be enhanced. They're forward compatible and backward compatible with things. They're designed to be that way. And, the people who work there, get jazzed by working on something that looks like the future. And to us older folk,
Right.
why not? Why not be excited and be exciting about how you do it? Whereas with NASA, if they get too glitzy and glossy, Congress will say, well, how much does that extra paint cost? I mean, they can't, they're nickel and diming them anyways. And, to make something look sexy would just be like drawing attention.
Is there any chance NASA would become privatized?
No.
And run by these other corporations?
No. NASA's government agent. Now, I take that back. I don't know what this Doge thing is going to do. I don't know what's going to go happen.
Yeah.
I did not vote for them. Okay, but they're in charge, so they're in charge. I have no idea, and I don't think they do, other than they want to cut. Well, I'm pretty sure we discovered during the pandemic that people work better sometimes by not being in the office, but then some jobs you have to be in the office because that's where your gear is. And Musk is a big thing about people going to work, but at the same time, these guys want to have less people doing it, and they want it more distributed. NASA has all these field centers. Could they get by with half of them? Yeah. But the thing is, they're established where they are. Nobody's shutting JPL down. Nobody's shutting Ames down. Nobody's going to shut Armstrong down. or Johnson. It's not going to happen. They may make it smaller, but they're not going to shut it down because that's just part and parcel of the economy. Can you imagine Pasadena, Lackawanna, Flint Ridge, that whole area, if JPL suddenly you just had some people laid off. That wasn't fun.
A bunch of them.
Yeah,
a bunch of them.
JPL technically is a contractor, so NASA can just go, bye-bye.
Yeah.
There's no protections. So, do you want to do that? Well, dial this back. Why do we have NASA? What's it supposed to do? All right, make a list, 1 page. All right, all the things are supposed to. Is NASA the best way to do all of those things? Well, maybe not. Well, running rocket companies? No. It's quite clear that the private sector can develop far more efficient and cost-effective rockets. So then that out. But there's some stuff that, like the Voyagers, like where I don't know where you would get somebody who would want to invest money to do Parker Solar Probe, although companies built that hardware. NASA should really be about the stuff that nobody else can do. Really, the stuff that doesn't have a profit motive, but it has an intellectual quotient. Or, to be honest, this whole leadership thing is coming back in America. Keep saying we make America great again. Well, NASA great again. And all. NASA's always been great. NASA's the only agency that's ever sent a spacecraft this close to a star, and at the same time has interstellar spacecraft. It has robots on Mars.
That still works.
Yeah, I mean we're pat ourselves in the back. And what does it take to do more of that stuff? Push the stuff off that you don't want to pay for because it's efficient to do it just by buying it. It's like the FAA. They don't. Well, they do have a few of their own airplanes, but if a bunch of FAA people are going to go to a meeting in Albuquerque, they buy an airline ticket. They don't have an airplane, and then they don't throw it away when they're done with it. So this is going to be the question of, what do we want NASA to be? People are worried about the conflict of interest in Elon. I think Elon's making his money launching satellites right now. I think he'll be okay. But there is that issue of, you could see it in sort of the administration coming in. Some say it's the bros in the techno world wanting things their way, and then the others wanting it some other way, and then some say just cut everything. And I don't know, I honestly have no idea how this is going to fall out, except if you're a government employee and you're seeing things like this Schedule F where they can, in essence, give you a loyalty test, and if they don't like the way you answer the questions, you can just be let go. I'd be worried. Is NASA still going to be there? Yes. It's what sort of NASA do you want it to become or get back to at the same time?
Well, that's going to be my question because, we have these plans to to build habitats on the moon with the Artemis program and the Artemis missions. It's like 4 stages, right? With Artemis?
Yeah. It changes.
I mean, so, and then, Mars. Everybody's focused on Mars, but we got to get back to the moon first. So I guess given this discussion that we just had about the dysfunctionality with government bureaucracy and NASA and space and these private companies, how are we going to do it? How are we going to get there? And how can we do it efficiently? As you probably mentioned, it's going to be some kind of hybrid of both, but who's going to do what and who gets to decide who does what?
Well, and who makes the big decisions ahead of time? It should come from the White House with sign off by Congress. But I mean, the last big brain fart they had was, let's go get an asteroid and bring it back to Earth, because of some of your neighbors were like, had this idea, and they said they pushed it on the Obama administration, and they were going to go bring an asteroid. Well, why? Well, they didn't really. Well, because we could. Well, all right, but it'll help us get to Mars. But why? How? And they said, well, the same technology we use for that, we can eventually use to go to Mars. Why don't we just, like several people said, if you want to go to Mars, go to Mars. Then they wanted to go back to the moon, which I understand we do have unfinished business there. And now they've morphed it into, well, we were going to be on Mars by the 2020s. Well, no, we're not. 2030s, I guess, maybe 2040s. But we're going to go to the moon because we want to learn how to live off world there before we can go to Mars and maybe make rocket fuel there. I don't think we're making rocket fuel from Mars there. Personally, you could, but it doesn't make any sense. But going to another world where you can learn to live there, you may say, well, they can just come home. Well, I've been on these expeditions to the Arctic where I could just get in an airplane if it landed and be back in civilization in an hour. But the point is, I was on a remote desert island. If the weather was bad, there was no help. If I cut my finger off, my finger's off. And my life, I could have an ATV accident. That's it. And it forces you to totally think differently about the reality of where you are. You can't just go to the parking lot or go to Fry's to buy a part that broke. You're stuck to,
Yeah.
and it does totally force, I mean, at Everest Base Camp, I mean, they could fly stuff in, but you pretty much, you were there with what you had, and going to the moon and learning how to get through that is great. But now, we're not going there to learn how to live off the land anymore. We're going there because China's going to beat us. Oh,
Right.
okay. Well,
There's a geopolitical reason now, not necessarily a
yeah,
scientific
all right.
reason now.
It keeps changing, and you just get a bit of a tennis match headache trying to figure out, well, what is the clear and present danger that I have to worry about, and what are the clear and present opportunities? Where do I focus, or is that my job? Oh, we got Space Force now. Okay, what do? Well, they're very good at recruiting, and they can promote space better than NASA can. But what are they going to do? Is this going to be James Bond with the guns or laser beams, or what are they? So we now have another Space Force, which has a bigger budget than NASA. Should they be cooperating? Well, I would think so. But then, wait, civilian space, military space. So you see my point? We're just all over the place. And China, I'm not going to defend them, but they're methodical. They have a unified command of where they want things to go, which companies and agencies build things. They have a plan, and they're going to be on the moon, whether we like it or not. The question is, do we want to beat them to do something we did 50 years ago? Or are we going to go back and do it better? Tell me what the metrics are, and don't change them in 4 years on me, which is what they do. Everything changes. Now, we don't really know what the goals are going to be.
Well, China has a supreme leader who's not going anywhere, and an iron fist to stop, any dissension. So that's how they get it done. And we're a free and open society that does change our presidents every few years, and administrations and it's just
it's
just
one of those things.
It's one of those things. It's a different thing. Let's talk about the habitats that would be built on the moon and Mars. I had the great opportunity. I'm a TV producer and writer, and I worked on a show on CBS called Innovation Nation. We did a story on Icon in Austin, Texas, this 3D printing company that has got the NASA contract to 3D print with concrete or whatever space material they can come up with these habitats on the moon and Mars. Is that really a possibility? And is that money actually, are they doing that? Or do you know anything about them actually building it?
I think it is, to be honest with you. And I could tell you, because like I said, if you go Google Devon Island greenhouse, you'll see the greenhouse that my business partner and I built. It was a commercial greenhouse that I had modified so it was a little stronger for the winds and stuff. But it was stick, it was sticks that we bolted together, and it was all. But if you went up there, you got frostbite in your fingers because we didn't have the right gloves or anything. We just had to ratchet the stuff together. It's there. It worked. It did its thing. It's fine. But it came there in a bunch of pieces.
Is it still standing now? Is it still standing there now?
Yeah, it's still there. You can see it's on Google Earth. It's
Wow.
It's not being operated right now. But point is, it was ball and stick sort of thing. Now, I'm going to go to moon or Mars. I got three things I got to worry about. I got to worry about keeping my life support, whatever it is, safe and efficient. 2, I got micrometeorites or something coming in I need to try and defend against. And I have radiation without an atmosphere to really protect me. Mars doesn't really have one that's going to help you. And so what that comes down to is either a thick material that, can prevent all that. And the old Apollo things show you, building these big domes and stuff like that. Now the thinking is regolith, which is dirt without living matter in it. If you just make the thick enough shield of that and just tunnel into it, you'll be fine. Now, how can you do that? Well, you could dig a trench, put your thing in there and cover it up. You can find caves, go in there and build a door. Or, you could do what they seem to be thinking about maybe doing with the SpaceX landers, is that when it comes down and lands, once you got all the stuff out, you tip it over like this, and then you bury it. And so the other way of doing this is you send a robot that can make copies of itself, and maybe the copies then make it a big 3D printer, and you take whatever you can find. Now, lunar, there's a lot of water all over the moon. As somebody once said, if it was, if the moon was made of concrete, you would mine it, but it's there. And you can use the regolith and the abundant solar energy to sinter the materials and then make your habitat by printing it. So that's now suddenly something we're building houses on Earth that way. You can do it on the moon. On Mars, you've got a bit more going for you. You have more chemistry and you have an atmosphere, you have abundant water and stuff like that. So you can sit there and make your version of Martian concrete or Adobe or something in between and have this thing make it like cake icing like that. And it can just go there and make these big domes without any people if you do it right, or they're in orbit controlling the things, and you can have a base built for you when you arrive. And it's built out. You don't have to bring the dirt and the mud and everything to Mars. You just have to bring the machinery. Seriously, but it's called in situ resource utilization, or ISRU, using living off the land, so to speak. And so if you can come up with ways to use what you find there, just like when we explored new areas on Earth, you're going to be better for it. But you got to bring everything with you. That's where it costs money.
Right. Yeah. How important is the NASA brand to the world? As far as, we talk, look, there's a lot of problems. We can be very critical about it, over budget, behind schedule, all those type of things. But they have done some amazing things, like this solar probe that just successfully went by the sun, survived 1,000-degree heat. But it's the NASA brand.
Yeah.
How important is the NASA brand to continue this journey of space exploration?
More than it is. It's exceptionally important, and more than NASA even comprehends, and they will admit it. And I've been ranting about this for 20 years. That the NASA brand is something that, you see this T-shirt now. I mean, I would post this up on NASA Watch. A friend of mine, Pete Warden, who was the former center director up in NASA Ames, was in Chile one time, and he was just driving around. He was going to eventually get to the observatory, and he stopped in this little town, and I don't know why, but he just took a picture of this kid with a tablet with a NASA logo T-shirt. He says, "What do you think that is?" I don't know. Well, it ended up the Chilean miner rescue, which you may remember was done with a lot of help from NASA. And so we're sort of guessing that logo became synonymous with smart thinking, helping, and so forth. But then I started looking around. NASA has a thing called space apps where they go around the world and have people do this sort of citizen science, open science sort of thing. And you see people, their biggest, accomplishment is to go and have somebody hand them a NASA sticker or a T-shirt with that logo. And if you look often enough, you see people in countries where, they might have 5 T-shirts because that's all they can afford, and one of them is the NASA logo. And having been involved with a NASA project, like in Nepal, which I know quite a bit about, is like a 5-star recommendation if NASA thought you were important enough to be involved. And in India, it's almost, you see these newspaper articles a lot that's saying that so-and-so has been accepted to a NASA project. Well, sometimes it's not exactly accurate, but that it's the brand of branding for space. And you just say, built by NASA, built with NASA technology. When I'm introduced on TV, former NASA scientist, it's got a cachet that goes with it that just stops you to say, yeah, NASA, to the moon, Hubble, cool stuff like that. And NASA sort of gets it here, but they're prohibited by Congress from advertising. By law, they can't advertise.
Yeah.
Full stop. Space Force, they got billboards. So the thing is, you've got this amazing brand, and they let a lot of people use it now, more than they ever did. Now you can buy watches and T-shirts and stuff like that, and it's just become a very sexy, groovy sort of thing that,
Do they get to profit off that, off those watches sales?
No.
They get no money from the merchandise. How stupid is that?
No, well, I don't know.
That's stupid.
Well, then it gets
They should get a piece of the action. Absolutely. Well, that's crazy. That's money coming in.
I agree, but if you sit and think about it, it's an amazing soft power that America has with NASA. It's sort of like when you see the people starving in pick a country. There's the bags of help. It says, provided by the people of the United States with our flag. All right? To me, my idea is, if you really want to help the world, you want to become you show that America isn't all bad. Some people think we are all bad.
Yeah.
How better than to have your young people aspire to something that has the NASA logo on it. Now, do you want to charge for it? I suppose they could. I mean, what NASA gets is they get ad hoc second lane advertising because they can't do it themselves. So if you start seeing the Transformers and and there's a big NASA logo, all right, NASA, Armageddon, all these other movies. So it's the only way they can. I'd rather see them give the use. There's rules. You can't put it on certain things. But the flip side is, if you put it there, you can also work with NASA. You can sign Space Act agreements and work with them and say, this has the approval or support of NASA. Then that's invaluable. You can't even place a cost. I suspect that the money they could make from licensing that logo would be small compared to the sheer outreach and inspiration and involvement that you can get if you really embrace it. But they can't, because one hand is tied behind their back. They cannot advertise. They have to let other people say the good shit about them.
Wow.
Where's the logic in that?
What percentage of the great scientific minds who are into astrobiology and exploring this field of technology, astrorobotics, astrochemistry, these young kids that are coming out of these, smart institutions, how many are aspiring to work at NASA, and how many are aspiring to work with Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos?
I don't really see a lot of the astrobiology people per se going to want to work at SpaceX now, except A, it's a job, B, it's a job in the space sector. And maybe down the road, he's going to go to Mars and need that sort of technology. I think at some point he's hired some people that are familiar with it, let's put it that way, but it's a small sort of skunk works where they're trying to figure out what do they do when they send these missions to Mars in 2028, what's going to be done. But in terms of where astrobiology is going to work, it's sort of like when I was an art major back in the day. Usually with art majors, you end up either advertising or being an art teacher,
Yeah, right.
Okay, yeah, all right. That's sort of like, your dreams fizzle out. But with astrobiologists these days, they're coming out of much more sophisticated technologies than when I was in school in the late 80s. We were just getting into gene sequencing. I was working with one guy, and we were working with sequencing one gene. Now you can just spit in a test tube, mail it away, and you find out where your ancestors are from. And so now your biology undergrads and grads come out with tools that are useful across the spectrum of biotech. So you don't need to be a one-trick pony anymore. Now, if you want to do astrobiology research, okay, we're narrowing in now, and that's usually government funded. But a lot of what's going into astrobiology now is extremophiles and genomics and metagenomics. And that has applicability. You could work on a contract on brewing yeast one day, and the next day you're working on something. It's a HIV test, and it's all the same tools. It's how you apply them. And so astrobiology folks, by the way, usually have an interest in astronomy. The ones that go out in the field had to learn how to go out and get dirty in the field, so they have that sort of experience. That may have worked on oil rigs for, Some of them have, so they always have another skill. That's not like a lot of stuff at NASA. You're an engineer. Astrobiologists and astrogeologists and astrochemists, that whole sort of triumvirate, tend to have more than one skill. So they're going where they need to go to get ready to feed their lifelong habit of eventually going to work for NASA, Canadian Space Agency, European Space Agency, JAXA, ISRO, and on and on and on, to get grants. And, it's sort of like you build up to that. But the day's going to come when you've got people in space doing pharmacological research now, not just one or two guys,
Right.
but several space stations. You're going to have people on the moon experimenting with life support that requires engineered organisms. And we're going to eventually find something on Mars that people say, you know what, yeah, life's been there. We're getting closer. And that's going to have another effect on, when we say, I was there when this happened in 1996, when the Allen Hills AH84001 meteorite was found. That galvanized me and people of my generation, and it's become the astrobiology community today. But that was premised on what was thought to be microfossils. I would say that probably they're not, but I was standing in a meeting once in the National Academy of Sciences about nanobacteria, which are very small bacteria. People didn't think they existed. But the fact that we saw things that were bio-like, the Academy had a workshop on nanobacteria. It happened so fast. I called the Allen Hill guys to tell them, hey, they're having this. They didn't know about it. That spurred people to say, you know what, well, fast forward. Now you've got Craig Venter, the guy who raced to sequence the human genome. He's created synthetic organisms with the smallest number of genes necessary. Well, all right, stop there. Origin of life. What's the smallest number of genes you have required to be alive? It's like approaching the same thing from two different directions. So you have all these things that were spurred on. Now, imagine tomorrow morning we come back and say we found some serpentine rock that's got microfossils and blah, 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 blah. And by the way, we see resonances that look like complex carbohydrates and the breakdown products of nucleic acids and so forth. And by the way, we can see little circles that aren't natural. We would say, darn, looks like life to us. The moment we say that, or we send a probe and it studies the soil and it finds something that is of a clearly biotic nature. Imagine where that's going to resonate now. It's not just going to be, in the U.S. or Europe, or what. It's going to be in every university in every country, big, little, small, up or down on the annual income proposals. They're going to all know about this, and because everything is now online, people will be able to jump in on this. And I gotta think, if you discover gold somewhere, there's going to be a gold rush. If you discover life on another planet, that's going to become one of the hottest career choices. And what do you do when you got a bunch of people who've got that career now saying, we want our astrobiology? You're going to go do more astrobiology.
Excellent. I love that.
I hope,
Yeah.
because I've seen it already happen once.
So you love astrobiology, so why go to Mount Everest? Why go to Mount Everest for a month with astronaut Scott Parazynski?
Yeah.
And what was the purpose of that mission? And tell us about
that. I met my wife rock climbing, so I was a climber.
Ah.
I had known Scott.
It's always a girl, son. It's always the girl.
Yeah, she still climbs. And Scott I have known forever, since he was a young MD at NASA, in the NASA space biology world. I've known him for 40 years almost. And so I'd known him, and I had done something on a conference called Risk and Exploration, where I had talked John Grunsfeld, an astronaut, and Sean O'Keefe, an administrator for NASA, into this conference we did. And it was about, how do you compare risks of, when we see somebody dies on Mount Everest, it's a news story. But, when somebody dies in a car accident, why is there not the same, why is it that when we see people climbing Everest and say, he's the first legless Republican real estate agent with one eye? Oh, you're in Guinness. Well, why is that?
Yeah.
But yet when space, to talk about the astronauts they come home anytime they want. It's like I said in several interviews, I'm on a remote research base, and they added more stuff in the plane. So instead of 10 seats, there's 8. 2 people got to wait. It's how expeditions work. So why did we go? Well, I did this conference, and Scott said, why didn't you invite me to the first one? And I said, well, I did. And he said, okay. So the second one, I was going to do another one. And he said, sorry, I sent me an email. Sorry, I'll be in outer space that week. I would like to come. And so he just said, hey, I'm going to go try Everest. We're both members of the fellows of the Explorers Club. And I said, you know what? We could turn it into an educational public outreach thing. So we came up with it. First time he tried going, he went. I couldn't go because China was pretty much in charge of that part of it. I would have been arrested and kicked out of the country because I was a pseudo-journalist. So that just fell through. Scott went, hurt his back, came back. Then we decided to go do it right. We got Miles O'Brien from CNN involved. And the 3 of us were going to go.
Mm-hmm.
We went and started doing the fundraising. We got money from all over the place, Discovery Channel, and I was working for like 5 different people at the time. Scott had left NASA. And, this time we decided to have a little fun, the moon rocks, all the other stuff. And we decided to do it with the Challenger Center. We were both on the board of directors at the time. All 3 of us actually worked. So we decided to, why not turn this into the first astronaut on the summit of Everest? How do we balance that sort of risk-taking with Challenger Center, which was formed off of now 2 tragedies? That whole discussion, how do we get that out there and talk about the value of this, what you gain from it? And, there's a little visibility that goes with it. And plus tricks like moon rocks and things like that. So that's where it came from. And, it ended up that, he made it up, and we did the live webcast, and you can still find the thing like that. And it showed NASA some things that could be done. And eventually those little moon rocks and a piece of the summit of Everest were put on a plaque, and it's now up in orbit on the space station in the cupola. So every time you look down at the Earth, you can look at Mount Everest, float under, and see a piece of Mount Everest and the piece of the moon. So it's sort of like a permanent reminder.
Yeah.
That was the whole point. I worked backwards from that idea. And then I had some conspirators at NASA who said, that's cool. And it was a bunch of fortunate accidents that made it happen. And it ended up that the person who approved that rock, we didn't know who this person was. Scott eventually met that person, thought it was an old Indian scientist. It was a young, beautiful Indian scientist. He ended up marrying her. So that moon rock,
wow.
yeah, I'm dead serious.
Wow.
So
Oh, my God. Really?
I was a moon rock matchmaker. Me and Bob
Wow.
Jacobs. That's about what the So, it's a serendipity
That's
that goes with
great.
all. You have to have a mind that's open to, yeah, why not? That's what happens. But why do we do it?
That-
Well, because we got away with it because we could. We found the money to do it. And it wasn't
Yeah,
easy. I got kidney damage that I have to, from being there. Everybody gets sick. I have to live with that now. Scott had to have surgery to get his back fixed from the first time.
Oh,
So,
man.
and you're living at 17,600 feet for a month.
Jeez.
Most of Earth's oxygen is not there. So it does take quite a lot out of you, but I think about it every day. Every single day I think about that experience. And during the pandemic and things I'm working on a book now that kind of builds on that. But I just wish, and you haven't asked me this, but I would just wish that some of the cool stuff that I've done, I always try to explain what it's like to be there and inspire others to come up with, well, you can do it too. You can go on an away team in the woods behind your house with your cell phone and a couple of things, and you can do actual, no kidding, what we'll do on another planet looking for life with your cell phone right now, if you get the right plan and the right data and all that sort of stuff. And that this is something that we're not done. The exploration is no longer a thing we used to do. It's a thing we're still doing. And wait till we get off this world onto the moon, onto Mars and elsewhere, there's going to be there's going to be no shortage of people wanting to explore and the number of opportunities to do so. But, you don't have to physically go there, although that's a lot of fun. You can explore right now sitting at your laptop, doing citizen science, helping to categorize galaxies, rocks, craters, and things like that. It's something that everybody can be involved with, which is something Krista McAuliffe spoke of. It's just something that space exploration belongs to everybody, and I've often said it takes a planet to explore the universe.
And Krista McAuliffe is one of the astronauts who perished in the Challenger disaster. Yeah, God bless her soul. What about these astronauts stranded, the Boeing astronauts that are stranded in the International Space Station? As just an average person who's not involved in the day-to-day of, SpaceX or Blue Origin or NASA, I'm just kind of like going, how is that even possible that they can't figure out a ride to get these people back down to Earth?
They can. Here's the thing. When they went up, the whole idea, first of all, when you go up there, you know that there's all kinds of contingencies, like they could make it to the space station and get out of their spacecraft and it could be like ruined. They knew that. They knew that that was a risk, that it would make it up there, they'd get into the space station and it would be not viable. That was known. This isn't like they just, oh my God, we didn't think that would happen. Or they could try to come home and have a problem and have to come back to the space. This is all in the planning of contingency. So it wasn't unknown. It was just unlikely. They wouldn't have launched them if they thought there was an excellent chance that it wouldn't work. The point was a test flight. You go up, bang it. Hey, okay, see you later. Bye. Come home. That was all it was. It wasn't meant to prove anything other than you can ride up, come back safely. And that flight was sandwiched between cargo flights without people with groceries, Russian Soyuz flights carrying up people, Russian Progress flights, and then SpaceX flights. So there's a linear thing of all these overlapping flights where 2 people go up, 3 come down, 2 go up, 3 come down. And, what they decided was, okay, we could totally throw all that off to bring these 2 guys home. But if they're cool with staying there, there's always too much to do up there. And I don't know Butch, but I've known Sonny forever. As a matter of fact, we're talking about Everest. When Scott Brzezinski went to the summit of Everest, he was carrying my old expired and voided NASA badge. His picture. And he was holding a picture of a dog, a little dog named Gorby, who had a port wine stain on his face. Gorby was Sonny Williams' dog. So I went to the summit of Everest with a dog. And so Sonny's up and down.
It's a very small clique of people you hang around with. Very small clique.
People do it everywhere. But so she's up there now. I know her. And I'm pretty sure they said, you're going to spend 6 more months in outer space. Okay.
So they're happy about it.
Yeah. There's real world. You go into this knowing, like I went to Devon Island, knowing that I could, and I got stuck up there one time because it was just, I got stuck. And that's the way it is. Everest, that was like schedule change every 3 minutes. That's how it's going to be. Now, they're not stuck up there. They could come home. If there was a problem with the space station right now, they could just hop in their Soyuz or they could come home.
Okay.
It's just, if you don't need to and you're willing to work
I see.
into the flow, and they've launched things like people are saying, oh, how do they get those Christmas hats on if they didn't think they were going to be up there? And I said, well, welcome to what's in your attic. It's last year's Christmas stuff,
Yeah.
which was used last
Right,
year
right.
before that. I mean, there's
Yeah.
hats, there's guitars up there, there's a piano, So this wasn't something, that it was unexpected and planned for. It was a contingency. They were going to come home in early 25, and now because of some training and stuff like that, they shuffled some more people around. They're going to wait longer. But again, it's always, can you guys do it? And the answer is almost usually yes. By the time you've been up there for 6 months, and if you've done it before, and you have the mind game ready, and Sonny doesn't have any kids to report home to, so it's pretty much her and her husband, and Butch has a family. But you figured out how to do that before. How many people get an extra chance? It's like in The Martian where the guy says, well, we're going to fly back to Mars and back. How many people get a chance to do that? How many people get a chance to, I mean, they picked these people in the first place because they are flexible, so it's not a surprise to me that this is the solution they saw. And it's not the first. There's people that stayed up there. Petty Wilhite stayed up there longer because they were able to work around her radiation exposure. And other people have sought to, stay longer if it's possible. And they'll ask them, hey, would you be willing to stay up there for another increment, which is another 4 to 6 months? And oftentimes they said, yeah. So
wow, that's kind of
nobody's stranded.
I do have a question about astronaut Scott Parazynski. Did he describe what he enjoyed more, what was more thrilling for him, summiting Everest on Earth or seeing Earth from space and having that rare opportunity to be one of those people who actually was in space?
I know a lot of astronauts. I know Scott very well. I mean, I got texted by another astronaut a few minutes ago. I mean, for me, it's not unusual to have astronaut friends, and I'll ask them sometimes, but usually they'll bring it up when it's something that just hit them. But oftentimes we discuss that when we're talking about how to do an outreach program or what, somebody's writing a book. But I got to say that with Scott, the thing was, when you're in orbit, you go around Earth it depends where you are, but like every 90 something minutes. So you get to see a sunrise and sunset, 15 times a day or something. And they're cool. I mean, if you look at any of these images, they're just spectacular riots of color, and no two are alike. And Scott had always said that he wanted to see what's called an orbital sunrise on the summit of Everest. And so when he went, a lot of people do it during the day so they can get the good photos. Yeah, he got some, but he got up the summit at like 4 something in the morning. It was dark. And I looked out of the tent, and there's alpenglow and so, but it was dark. It was like minus 30 where I was. It was colder up there.
Oh my God.
Fahrenheit, not centigrade. Minus 30 was Fahrenheit. And so the water freezes when you throw it up and all that. And he wanted to be there. He decided not to sleep. He wanted to be on that summit with his team. He wanted to see that orbital sunrise. So when all the morning commuters were coming up, he was already on his way down. So his thing was to repeat that experience. He was literally standing at an altitude where airliners fly, the highest person. And at that point, Scott in particular, but were the 2 NASA people closer to space than anybody else anywhere for a month. Scott, and we were talking to, our friends up in the space station, and another mutual friend of ours was in orbit, John Grunsfeld, fixing Hubble. And, and I eventually wrote something about it called my Star Trek episode at Everest. You can find that, where we knew this was something special, and we surfed on that every day. Even when you were feeling sick, you just like, I'm sitting with moon rocks, and we're practicing photos for him, and you can find them on the internet. I'm standing there.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that picture yesterday. Yeah, it's a great shot.
I'm eclipsing the moon with a piece of the moon at Everest Base Camp. Tingle, tingle, tingle. I mean, it was like that every day. So again, it's a frustration I have that more people can't have these residences. I mean, I have it when it flies over my house. I helped design a space station, so every time it flies over my house and I can see it, I go out there. My neighbors know why. I'll stand in the middle of the street and look up just to see it. And I just wish NASA could get more engaged in that, and not just NASA, but Planetary Society, all these other organizations could be unshackled from the stupid government rules and so forth, and really just get people out there looking up at what's going on and knowing that they could actually go out. I mean, California especially has got so many different biomes that you can go out and do desert sorties in a way that, other than you're breathing, you could do them in a fashion, it's called an analog, where you use places on Earth to resemble certain parts of a mission. You can do something that is of scientific value, that is also what it would be like if you had a spacesuit on to do the same thing in another world. I mean, the Apollo astronauts, they used to train in these craters and so forth. How can you not want to bring that experience beyond just a bunch of space weenies? I mean, that's something I wish NASA could do, whether it's Starfleet Academy or something like that, but for everybody on the internet, not just 1 or 2 zip codes. It's got to be for everybody.
Final question, and thank you so much for being such a fabulous guest. I could talk to you for another couple of hours. What are you curious about? What do you sit and just ponder and go, I wish I could, or whatever? You've had such a great life experience. Yeah, you've had this tremendous life career and experience so far, but what still just makes you dream and think about, wow, I wish I could do X?
Life? Oh, well, what I could do, I mean, I want to go to Antarctica. That's on my bucket list. I want to go to space, but it's probably not going to happen. I've sent my NASA badge all over the world. My NASA badge has been to space, Summit of Everest, North Pole, South Pole, Titanic, Challenger Deep.
And you've done astronaut training, right? You've done the gyro thing.
Yeah, I did I had a great time with the centrifuge. I did the weightless. I mean, anybody in good health, I did this in my late 50s. Anybody in good health can take depends where you are in the profile, but 3 to 4 to 5 Gs. If you learn a few tricks, and anybody can do it. Weightlessness, most people do. I mean, I'm immune. I didn't take any drugs. I'm one of those lucky people. I just did everything. But it's not an alien environment for a lot of people. So when these people are going up in Blue Origin, they've had some preliminary training, but it's not something that regular folks can't do, or old people can't. I mean, William Shatner was 91 when he went up. So
I got a chance to fly with the Blue. I know what you're talking about. I got a chance to fly with the Blue Angels. I flew with the Blue Angels once, and we did a carrier, what they call a carrier brake turn.
I know what those are. Yeah.
250 knots at 90 degrees and 6.6 Gs. It was fantastic.
Well, I pulled 6.2, so you're ahead of me by 0.4. But I landed at Namche Airport in Nepal, which many people say is kind of like if Noah's Ark landed slightly sideways in the mountain, now you're going to land on it. And
most dangerous airport in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. I e-ticket. I go do it again. But to your point, what do I think about? It's something really simple. I just imagine. I mean, we almost had it with the Allen Hills thing with the Mars meteorite, and was at where I worked at the time, American Institute of Biological Sciences, and I had to go from room to room to tell people. And I broke up in tears a couple times. This meteor, they had found this. And of course, it ended up later. I know both of the guys behind it, and it was a disappointment for them because a lot of people said no. But when we know that life has arisen somewhere else, I don't care what it looks like. That to me, I just want to go to my grave knowing we're not alone. I may never get to meet the aliens, although it was kind of funny if you saw Close Encounters at the end with the aliens. I used to be a sign language interpreter. I went to see it with my deaf roommates. But it was totally logical that the aliens would be signing, But I just knowing that life is not something only on this world, and if we find it somewhere else in our solar system, go do the Carl Sagan on it. I mean, there's like the chances that it happened twice in one solar system. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous, and we're not alone.
Yeah.
And it's like the end of Contact, where they had that soliloquy about, you're so alone. And so it shouldn't be that way. And I don't think it is. I'd like to know that we have a living universe, not a stark, empty one full of, radiation and gas.
Part of me thinks after talking to you for over an hour, you just mentioned Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I think you're kind of like the Richard Dreyfuss character in that movie. You're driven. You're obsessed. You want to know. You want the answers.
I've been known to goof on people at making mountains out of mashed potatoes when it's space people, but, yeah, yeah, I grew up in the Apollo era. The
Yeah.
first notion I remember Scott Carpenter. I was a little kid. I remember this. I remember all the flights. During Gemini, I get sick every 2 months. My parents figured it out because that's how often the Geminis flew. I was drawing rockets. I mean, I'm a child of Apollo, and I
Yeah.
sort of have a bit of a different resonance with it. I wrote about this. My father was almost killed by a V2 in London. His roommates
Wow.
never came back. We don't know what happened to him. And I had a chance to visit the crater that actually is in the middle of Hyde Park with a friend of mine who I'd met, an Aussie who was an expat Brit who sailed around the world backwards with another friend. And they had met my friend Leroy Chow, who was on a space station at the time. And I had only met Leroy on a space station. This, again, is another one of these that people tend to just sort of glom onto each other who've had these weird experiences. But here I was, and I've written about this, that my dad, who died of Alzheimer's, and I didn't write about this till he had passed, that here was this vengeance rocket built by slaves that terrorized people and almost killed my father. And here I am, and I was at the World War II Memorial on his 100th birthday, would have been his 100th birthday, with my NASA badge, his dog tags, and my badge had been into space on a rocket designed as like the stepchild of that rocket that almost killed him. And that I embodied a complete career that had evolved out of that rocket and the technology. And so for me, I don't know, and there I was on his 100th birthday holding my, taking the pictures. So I'm all about resonances and things like that. I think there's always a lesson. And then I was at the Air and Space Museum one time, and I had just gone to see an exhibit and came in, and I saw some people next to the V2 rocket talking, and I heard it was in Dutch and English and German, which I speak a little bit of. And it ended up, this guy was Dutch, and his wife was German, and they lived in Holland, and their son spoke all these languages. They themselves were completely removed from the World War experience. They could have been my children and my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. And they were explaining to their son how this had happened, and it ended up where they live is near The Hague. They live about 1 kilometer away from the launch site where this rocket that almost killed my father was launched.
Wow.
And I had just seen an exhibit on 2001, which I saw. So, I think life, maybe I'm like Forrest Gump, half Forrest Gump, half Luke Skywalker. I don't know. But I there are resonances with everybody's life, and maybe space isn't their thing, but the exploration, the going places, the finding things. You can do it if you're disabled. You could do it if you're old. You could do it if you're dyslexic, if you're deaf, if you're blind. Anybody can do this. And I just wish NASA would be empowered further to just get this out there and to do it globally, not just within the U.S. All in there.
All righty. Astrobiology.com is the website you want to check out. Also, NASAWatch.com, the notorious NASAWatch.com. Journalist, scientist, and storyteller. You're a
Trekkie.
storyteller.
Beam me up.
And Trekkie. Yeah, all right. Keith Cowing, thank you so much for being on our Ignition Sequence podcast, and we look forward to talking to you again in the near future.
My pleasure.
Ignition Sequence is produced by Accelerator Media, a nonprofit organization dedicated to inspiring a lifelong pursuit of knowledge. Join us every week as we dive into the science, the stories, and the extraordinary journeys that challenge our understanding of the world. Subscribe now and ignite your curiosity with us. Ignition Sequence. Listen, learn, repeat.